Welcome to our webinar, Assessment Reimagined, Compliant and Creative Pathways for K-12 Evaluation. The Education Division is excited to be able to put this on. We have 4 participants in addition to myself, and you'll be meeting them in this order. First will be Khalid Ismail, the Principal Consultant for Education First, who will give us an overview of the status of the field on this topic. Lynn Schemmel, who's the Deputy Chief Academic Officer and Director of Student Assessment at the Indiana Department of Education, will be giving us an overview of the program that they are working on in Indiana. Arthur Vanderveen is President and CEO of New Meridian Corporation, talking about the approach New Meridian is working on, particularly with the in Montana. We will have hopefully time for Q&A at the end of all 3 people. The question and answer at the bottom bar of the Zoom window is live. We can see it. Only the hosts and panelists can see it. The chat is not enabled, and you will be kept muted throughout. You will receive a follow-up email, all registrants will, with a link to the recording of this session on the ATP site, so that you can revisit or share as you wish. Next slide, please. And Khalid, I believe it's up to you to start them. Thank you all.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jesse.
Good
morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us. Like Jesse said, my name is Khalid Ismail. I'm a principal consultant at Education First for a national mission and policy and strategy organization that supports education institutions, state education agencies, and districts in transforming their systems to better serve students and families across the country. And our work on assessment and accountability, in particularly, helps state leaders and district leaders rethink the way they measure progress and think about student success overall. You can go to the next slide. I think it's really important to start with some grounding for our conversation today. And that is to name that we believe that every student in the United States deserves a high quality education that prepares them for success in life and in the post-secondary pathways and careers of their choice. And that assessment and accountability systems provide us with critical information to help make sure that all students, schools, and systems are making progress towards that vision and have the right supports in place when they are making progress and the right interventions in place when they are not. And so we all know that at this moment in time, our country is undergoing a lot of transformation. It's probably one of the most significant moments in education policy in decades. There's a lot of shifts happening at the federal, state, and local level, and the policy landscape is evolving really quickly. This is both creating opportunities for states and for districts to pause, to reevaluate what the work ahead should look like, and it's providing them with opportunities for innovation as well. And in this environment, we believe that states have several opportunities to innovate and improve, particularly their state assessment systems, while maintaining critical guardrails. And so as you listen to my colleagues today share the work that they're doing, you'll see that they are, as they're transforming state systems of state assessment, they're still working to make sure that they're focusing on academic achievement, that they're focusing on grade level standards across the state, that the programs that they're administering are providing valid, reliable, and comparable scores for every student and every school, and they're making the data publicly available and disaggregated for every student group, and it's helping identify schools for intervention and or accountability purposes. And so these are critical guardrails that must be maintained from our perspective in whatever program that a state pursues, particularly when it comes to statewide assessment models. But at the same time, we know that historically, end-of-year summative tests have not lived up to the expectation that many stakeholders have. So for a long time, we've heard some of the concerns and challenges with end-of-year traditional summative assessments, particularly that they lack utility to teaching and learning, that the results come back too late and are not useful to adjust instruction for students and or adjust the support for students, that they require a large footprint, both on the overall system and as well as in terms of preparation and administration on local systems. And ultimately, they are misaligned with when and what students are taught and in their curriculum. Some argue that they're not intended to be aligned to curriculum or used for teaching and learning. But if students are spending so much time taking end of year tests and educators are spending so much time preparing for them, why not try to make them more useful? And so you'll get to hear from my colleagues today talk a little bit about how they're using 3-year models in particular to help solve for some of those challenges. Some of you might have heard of 3-year models before. In case you haven't, um, 3-year assessment models administer multiple tests throughout the school year as part of an assessment system that's designed to produce a single summative score. This model was allowed under ESSA, particularly as a way to provide a single summative score that can be used for accountability purposes. And so 3 things that you should look for when you think of a 3-year model: there are multiple shorter tests throughout the year, they're providing timely feedback to teachers and students, and ultimately they're providing a single summative score. How states are achieving these 3 goals varies, and you'll hear 2 different models today of how 2 different states are thinking about achieving this particular purpose in their own programs. It's important to note that the US Department of Education and under federal law, there are several opportunities and pathways for states to both design, pilot, and scale innovative assessments. IEDA is one path to Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority, which is a waiver authority that allows states the flexibility to design, pilot, improve comparability, and transition all schools to a new innovative assessment system within a time span of 5 years. The benefits of going through an IEDA path is that it allows states the opportunity to relieve districts from double testing requirements. And it also provides an opportunity for states to iterate and test and pilot their model in a more flexible way. Recent guidelines also eliminated the need to demonstrate scale score comparability between the innovative program as well and the legacy test. And so that update has been well received by many states. And you'll hear my colleagues talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities when it comes to demonstrating comparability with new models. The other thing I'll note is that with CJSA, the competitive grants for state assessment over the last several cycles, the priority has encouraged states to develop new assessments of academic achievement that incorporate multiple measures of academic and durable skills, including performance tasks, technology-based assessments, projects, and extended performance tasks. And you see in the most recent competitions that states were also encouraged to design a statewide system that meets federal requirements and could do so by integrating curriculum-embedded performance tasks or interim 3-year assessments. We think that that was a signal from the Department of Education to encourage states to explore the viability of this model. Just a quick note on terminology. You'll hear both my colleagues on this call, myself, as well as others in the field use different terms for what I described as 3-year. So you'll hear folks talk about multiple interims, curriculum anchored assessments, curriculum relevant, through grade, and through course. And so ultimately the field is evolving in its understanding and its knowledge of this particular model. And as different states design their approach, they are using different terminology. Ultimately, again, just grounded in the 3 goals that I named earlier, most of these terms fall under that definition. And I'll just wrap by naming that there's a lot of interest and uptake around the country for this particular opportunity and this model. And so across the country over the last several years, at least 13 states have piloted or are currently operating a 3-year model as part of their summative assessment systems. Again, they look different and they all use maybe different terminology for them, but if you're using that definition that I described, we've seen up to 13 states either run pilots and are currently operational, and even up to 20 that have explored the concept in recent years, either joining communities of practice or learning opportunities where they're trying to understand whether this model is viable for their own context. And I'll say that when a state is trying to decide if this is the right model for their own system, there's really 6 considerations that I'll just leave you with, and you'll hear my colleagues on this call who will share next. talk a little bit about how they've addressed each of these. One, the state should get really, really clear on the purpose and the use of the model that they're pursuing. They should understand, name, and share with their key stakeholders what information they can expect to be produced and when and for whom that information will be produced. They'll need to name what sorts of alignment or lack thereof or connection to local curriculum folks could expect around the state, when and how students are supposed to demonstrate proficiency, what happens if a student demonstrates proficiency on a particular standard earlier in the year, how will their scores be counted, um, how the state will score and provide achievement results at the end of the year. Will they aggregate scores from multiple administrations? Will they use only the final administration? And then, most importantly, what is the role of educators, students, and families as part of the design process and as the state is moving forward with a new system? And so I'll just say that there are no right or wrong answers to these questions, but it's really, really important that a state's choices and responses to these questions are reflecting both their values, their goals, and their priorities. And so um, over the course of the next 40-ish minutes, you're going to hear from my colleague, Lynn Schimmel, who is the Deputy Chief of Deputy Chief of Assessment in the Indiana Department of Education, talk about how Indiana's approached this. And then you'll also hear from my colleague, Arthur Vanderveen, talk about how New Meridian and Montana have approached these questions. And I look forward to hearing your questions at the end. And Lynn, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Khalid. And thank you everyone for joining today. I'm really sorry my camera is not working, but I'll just use that as a plug. I'll be sharing this presentation much more in depthly at NCSA in a couple weeks. So you can not only come and hear me, but also see me as well. What I'd like to share with you is our Indiana through-year assessment model. And when Khalid talked about, some ties to learning, that's really what I think our system is becoming. It's more about a learning system, which I'm really excited about because after 30 years of being in a public school system with almost 20 of those being a curriculum director, I'm just really excited about that. So our goals of our design and what we're trying to achieve, we've been working on this model for about 2.5 years, and we just finished our first pilot year of it, and it will be operational next school year. But we had several aims that we were doing. We have a formative assessment grant in which schools could apply for grant funds to purchase various approved interim and formative assessments that would then lead into our state summative. There were various requirements, one being, for example, that they needed to be 85% aligned to our standards. And so that in and of itself caused some disconnect. And so our system now being 100% aligned is working much better and will be as teachers and families take next steps with their students for additional learning. We wanted to provide actionable data throughout the year. Can you go back, Walt? Shorten the overall testing time. We want to connect teachers directly to resources and AI opportunities. We're redesigning our reports, providing quality PD, all in that we're trying to improve the quality and usefulness of our state assessment system, really thinking about the instructional utility. So we have brought multiple collaborative partners and thought leaders together to not only partner us with in the assessment itself, but also with that focus on instruction. The theory of action for our model is opportunity to learn. And so, first of all, we are helping teachers to prepare using instructional assessment frameworks, showing transparency proficiency levels. Students then participate in the learning activities that the teachers have set out for them to do. Checking for learning is when they take our interim assessments, which we call our iLearn checkpoints. After the data is received, then teachers can review that data to see what interventions, next steps might need to be for students and any learning gaps that they might have. We have a second opportunity that students can take with our end goal of being mastery by the summative at the end of the school year. Next slide, please. So this is one picture of our model. Back in spring of 23, we sent out a summary or a survey to all of our schools and corporations across the state, asking them where they teach the various state standards. We had an 80% return rate on that standard, which really gave us a good jumpstart with our blueprint. And so then we had various committees come in and we refined that. So within our 3 checkpoints that we have, they are 9-week or 11-week windows. The middle one's a little bit longer due to holidays. 4 to 7 standards are assessed on each one, with about 22 to 25 items. The system is computer adaptive. Each checkpoint assesses different standards for the most part. We have a 3rd grade reading test, for example, and so it was really important when we brought in our grade 3 teachers that they wanted to see data on those standards all year. And so when they got to that high stakes reading test, that they had some information leading into that. But all 3 checkpoints then lead to the shortened summative. The summative is the only component of our system that is used for the scale score for accountability. Each of the checkpoints, the data is aggregating to the reporting categories. So not impacting that final score, just the information for the overall reporting categories. There is a second chance opportunity, so that opens up after each initial checkpoint. You can go ahead and go forward. All right, here's a little bit more of an expanded component then. So each checkpoint, I mentioned about 4 to 7 standards. In Indiana, 2 years ago, we had legislation that required us to remove 25% of our standards and then deem no more than 1/3 of those as priority standards or essential standards. And so it was really important for our State Board of Education that when we built this model, that the checkpoints then are really assessing those essential standards, those ones that are key as students that are important for students as they move on to that next grade level. So each of the standards then are lumped together, those that are closely related, into subdomains. And then the subdomains are what's feeding into the overall reporting category. So like a reporting category, for example, is number sense. And then within the number sense might be fractions or place value, et cetera, which are what those subdomains are. And then again, the summative is the only component used for our scale score, which includes all of the essential standards. So every student is tested on those essential standards. And then since we're required to assess the depth and the breadth, then each kid gets a sampling of the remaining standards on that summative. So I mentioned our pilot year. We just finished with that. A year ago when we had the sign up, we had 75% of our schools sign up to be part of our pilot. So we were super excited about that. We didn't know if it would actually happen that way when we started the school year, but it did. So we had 1,350 schools pilot with us, which gave us a lot of great data. We had 360,000 iLearn Checkpoint Math and iLearn Checkpoint ELA assessments given. So the requirement was that when schools signed up, they could test all of their grade level. They could just take a couple classrooms. They could give, one group of students math, one group of ELA to pilot it. But again, we had 75% of schools. So we wondered what would that equate to and what level of students would be participating. We had 56,000 to 62,000 students participate in each grade level. So we had about 75% of each grade level participating. So that was, again, really exciting. We got a lot of great data. And then we had over 6,500 individual educators that provided direct feedback. So I mentioned that initial survey we did where 80% of our 700 and some schools or corporations that we have gave us information. We gave a couple surveys throughout the year. We had over 1,500 educators take those surveys. We had various focus groups throughout the year, including parents. And then we've had various educator committees throughout. So over 6,500 individual people have directly impacted our work. But really, as Khalid was talking again, and this is what I'm super excited about, it's just the focus on instruction and the use of data that this assessment system has become for us. And so there's a couple areas where we're triangulating information, and this is an area where I'll go more in depth in a couple weeks. But it really starts with our assessment frameworks, which are in the upper right, which helps to prepare teachers for their scope and sequence and understanding what proficiency is. And then that moves into our instructional frameworks as they're thinking more deeply about the standards prior to instruction with a lot of information there. And then they give the assessment, and the centralized reporting system is Cambium's system, where they can get the data and then begin thinking about how well the students did, if there are any gaps. And then that cycle starts over as they think about interventions. So what I did, since I can't go into each one of them during this, I just took some screenshots. So the assessment frameworks, again, that's where it starts. We have this is really an expanded blueprint, which you're used to seeing, just maybe a table, but it's really been expanded in that it not only shows the scope and sequence where which standards are assessed on each checkpoint, but also gives a lot of other information. Over on the left side, each standard is hyperlinked to our item specification, which gives educators an understanding of what at proficiency is, as well as some example items. We have various standards and instruction support built into those as well. After the assessment, then linked at the top of each of these columns are our PLD maps, so our performance level descriptor maps, in which we've taken and mapped all of the PLDs that we've created. So we've broken each standard down into a 3+1. So we have 4 levels below, approaching, and at proficiency. And then we also have above proficiency. So teachers can see how well the students did and where the mapping is of their classroom or an individual student. And then they can also come back and revisit those example items. Another key thing, if we're showing what proficiency looks like and what type of instruction is needed and exposure that kids need to see, what proficiency is, they can use these tools also as they think about their curricular materials and as they're reviewing those to see if based on what that curriculum provider provides, are they providing proficient examples, or do we need to supplement? Is my instruction at that level, or am I only teaching approaching? And that's been really eye-opening for our state as we've shared examples of items. They thought they were teaching at proficiency when they weren't. And then if they're not, then we shouldn't be surprised at the end of the year if we weren't providing those at proficiency opportunities. So this is just a larger picture so you can see what that looks like. And we can go ahead and go to the next. There's the performance level descriptor map that I mentioned. So below, approaching, at, or above. For example, there's 2 number sense standards from place values. So that's expanded for each individual checkpoint. There's one that just shows the standards, and then we have one that shows all standards throughout the year. These are a couple screenshots of our item specification. So 2 of the pages for this standard 3NS1, which is a number sense standard. We've got information about the standard, what reporting category, subdomain it belongs to, which checkpoint it's assessed on. It's tied to our instructional framework, so no matter which resource a teacher is in, they can always get back to the other. There's information about content limits and clarifications, but then really as you work down to the bottom of that left hand side screenshot, shows you below proficiency, and then moving over to the right, there's approaching, and then it gets into at. And again, this has been really key as we've demonstrated for teachers, some sample items and what it means to be at proficiency in a standard. The instructional frameworks then which were the second part. So prior to instruction or intervention. So again, giving more information about standards, vertical alignment, showing looking back and looking ahead, examples, various instructional supports and strategies. So for example, I mentioned that we removed 25% of our standards. So within some of those standards, there were key concepts and skills that are still important. It also helps to provide concepts and skill progressions and understanding results. And then after, additional information and resources to support remediation and review common misconceptions. Here's the centralized reporting system. And then there's also an individual student report, which I'll get into a second, but this is an opportunity to review student and classroom data, considering groups of kids that need similar support, thinking about creating individual student learning plan, using these, the data from these components in conjunction with both sets of frameworks that I shared, and then also in conjunction with ClearFrame API, which I'll talk about. This is an additional, so since the blueprints have the scope and sequence for what's assessed, there are standards that aren't assessed till the summative, but still providing that support. It's a suggested scope and sequence. There's still local control, but we're trying to help with those other additional standards as to when they should be taught. We're going to be expanding those instructional frameworks to include models and manipulatives, as well as tier 2 and tier 3 supports. We are also adding concepts and skills. And so what are those prior knowledge skills that students need for that standard to be successful? And then we're stair-stepping with each of the PLDs, progression of the learning concepts and skills that also occur within those. Next slide. And then utilizing data. So again, it's another area for triangulation as we're thinking about instructional utility. So using the data that we have from the frameworks and Cambium system to the individual student report and then to the API. So here's a multi-page student report that we have. This first page just gives overall information about where the student scored. So you can see the proficiency level in the bar chart. We'll be giving an on-track prediction as well as percentile rankings. Next one. This one, just again, based on where the student scored at the proficiency level, gives some information about what students typically can do and what they should do next. Next slide. So here's kind of when I was talking about the proficiency level descriptors, giving educators and also families a backdoor look at how students are performing on the items that are mapped to those levels. So we're giving an overall, how did students do on below proficiency items, approaching proficiency items, etc. And we're moving to standards-based reporting with those as well. So they'll know what band they were in for each of the individual standards. Here's an example. Again, it's just a mock-up of what the individual student items. So they received 22 to 25 items. So they'll know for each item where they scored, if they got it correct and what level it was at. And then lastly, go ahead and go to the next one. Just thinking again about being purposeful and innovative through all of our steps. So one of the, go ahead and go to the next one. So one of the opportunities that we had as we removed some of those formative interim assessments that I mentioned, educators and the schools were using those other assessments to map into individual learning platforms for kids. Cambium has a feature called ClearFrame, in which it's basically a doorway for our data to map into curriculum vendor systems. So this has been super exciting working with various curriculum vendors. We piloted with IXL, Edmentum, and Learning A to Z this past school year with a small group of corporations. So those companies have rebuilt their platforms on the back end to align to the frameworks that I mentioned, which is exciting. They're not just taking our data, but they're using all the components of our system as they're rethinking how this could occur. And then we have continued discussions with some others. So I'm looking forward as we add Curriculum Associates is coming on board next year, looking at possibly Renaissance as well. You can go ahead and go to the next one. You can go ahead and advance, Walt. Yep, and then just really quickly, here's just some additional last minute things. So we'll have a family portal that families can directly connect to their student results and resources. I mentioned the predictive model. Khalid mentioned CGSA, so our grant opportunity there is providing not only content and pedagogy modules, but standard spotlight videos and guides for parents and educators. So on each one of the standards, we're building out a library to give them a short video about misconceptions or how they could, activities they could do at home with their kids around that standard to help improve, and then a corresponding guide. The API will have criteria for vendors to sign on to be part of our system, and then also professional development for admin administrators who are instructional leaders trying to lead this work, as well as all the components of our system, short modules, so that when others couldn't attend professional development, we still have ways to reach them. And now I'm turning it over to Arthur.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Good morning, good afternoon. Arthur Vanderveen. I'm the president of New Meridian. We're a nonprofit founded in 2016, and we partner with states primarily to develop innovative new assessment solutions. And since 2021, we've been working on a through-year assessment design with Montana that I will share more about today. Before getting started with our work in Montana, wanted to frame a little bit as we've been working with states and they're looking at how might we transition to a through-year design. Questions of, well, what flexibility already exists in ESSA come up. And so it's helpful just to be aware of what flexibilities are. So in the next slide, so ESSA has significant flexibilities for states to adopt innovative new models. It may be hard to believe or recall there was once a question of whether states could use computer adaptive assessments to test all grade level standards, and ESSA made clear that that was acceptable. ESSA provides flexibilities to use competency-based assessments that can include extended performance tasks. It also supports using multiple measures throughout the year. You may remember that Park and Smarter Balanced introduced systems of assessment with test administrations during the year back in 2014. ESSA made clear that that was acceptable. And then finally, states were given flexibility to allow districts within the state to choose a nationally normed college entrance exam for high school accountability purposes. So those are some of the flexibilities that are already inherent in ESSA. What we'll see, however, is that just because they're allowed doesn't eliminate the technical challenges associated with incorporating those innovative assessment designs into their system of assessment. So as states have been adopting through-year models that include multiple measures throughout the year, they've had to address two critical issues, both of which were apparent in Lynn's description of the work in Indiana. And those are how do you align to the local curriculum, and how do you provide a single summative score as required by ESSA? So on the question of aligning to the local curriculum, I think three kind of models have emerged. The first is aligning unit level assessments to specific curricula within the state, as we have seen with the guidebook curriculum in Louisiana. Another option is for states to use standards-based through-year assessments that can be flexibly aligned to multiple local scope and sequence through the year. We think that's apparent, certainly apparent in Montana, and I'll say a lot more about that and relevant in Indiana as well. And then some states have adopted really curriculum agnostic assessments that essentially measure the same blueprint throughout the year. So don't try to tackle this issue of how do we align to the local scope and sequence. On the second issue is how do you produce a second score? The challenges are, you can take different approaches to this. The simplest answer is to just use the final score as the summative score for accountability purposes, and generally use the through-year measures for instructional and benchmark purposes. North Carolina had an interesting model that they're no longer using, but in their Check-ins 2.0 framework, they were using the fall and winter assessments as a kind of extended multi-stage adaptive design where scores from those two earlier administrations informed where the final administration started students in terms of their entering proficiency level. And then finally, our model in Montana is to aggregate all the scores throughout the year into a summative score. And I'll say more about that in a minute. So in Montana, we partnered with them over the last 3 years to develop the Montana Aligned to Standards Through-Year Assessment, or MAST. And 3 years of research funded by several CGSA grants, as well as philanthropic support, conducting stakeholder engagement, piloting, and refinement of the assessment design. This year we went operational, and we will submit for peer review this coming winter. So Montana's desire to design a new through-year model emerged from their frustration with current assessment systems, including both the summative and the interim assessments being used within the state. I'll go into more detail on these issues in the next few slides. Montana's priority commitment was to better align assessment to the taught curriculum. It was their driving priority, and it really informed their design. This represents really a significant change in the paradigm. On the left, quick summary of kind of traditional model. States have a summative measure at the end of the year that has no instructional value, as it's really not intended to by its design. Summative assessments, because of the way they sample the standards throughout the year, also can have the effect of narrowing the curriculum. Districts operating within that regime naturally adopt interim assessments to get early indicators of students' progress toward proficiency, but generally these are not aligned to the taught curriculum, not aligned as closely as Montana wished. And so that was having the effect of kind of taking instruction out of the planned curriculum and sometimes having teachers focus on drilling decontextualized concepts and skills in preparation for the end of year test. So, nope, if you go back. So Montana, and we really try to design something quite new, and it is to use short diagnostic modular assessments that provide fine-grained feedback on one or two standards to classroom teachers on content that was recently taught in the classroom. And MAST then aggregates those scores into a reliable, comparable end-of-year summative score without the need of an end-of-year test. So simple representation, really what's tested is what's taught. And that was a kind of a mantra in Montana. We want to ensure that we test students on what they've had an opportunity to learn. We want to reduce their frustration of being tested on the end of year blueprint before they've had a chance to learn that content. We think that provides a fairer, more accurate measure of growth throughout the year, really emphasizing ensuring students have had an opportunity to learn. So this level of content-aligned assessment introduces a challenge for how do you align the test to the local district's curriculum or scope and sequence. So no state is going to impose a statewide curriculum. So we had to develop means for districts and even schools to align to their local scope and sequence. So you have here this illustration of our scheduler, which enables the district or even a school level to lay out testing windows throughout the year between 3 and 6. And then they assign testlets to each testing window based on their local scope and sequence. They essentially have the opportunity to build their own state summative assessment aligned to the curriculum. They have a chance to see what each testlet is measuring, what standards are covered, and we also provide pre-configured sequences aligned to about 25 different math curricula that districts in Montana have adopted to make that step easier. The next two slides illustrate the grain size of the assessment claims that we support. This is an example from 5th grade, the 12 testlets that are available in 5th grade within the subdomains in math and then the clusters. We're reporting out on each of those cluster level claims with each testlet. So quite fine-grained in math. And then in ELA, we report on students developing mastery throughout the year of the anchor reading comprehension standards that you can see here. So educators get good fine-grained reporting on the components of what is more of a holistic approach to reading development, reading comprehension throughout the year. So a few examples of our reports, again, shows the variety of reporting claims that we can support with this approach. This first report is an individual student report for a specific testlet. This one is add and subtract rational numbers. It includes 12 questions, takes on average about 22 minutes, and you can see the fine-grained item level reporting we provide for each student. We then aggregate their item level scores for this testlet. So this is a report on a single student's performance for that testlet, which includes a performance band of where that student performed. And we also provide the points earned for each standard assessment, in this case, a single standard regarding number sense. And let me make one other point here. We also are able to derive misconceptions within that unit based on student response patterns across those 12 questions. And so this teachers are finding really instructionally valuable information on misconceptions that each student is demonstrating. Then after a student takes 3 testlets, we provide a prediction of the student's end-of-year proficiency, both as a scale score and as a performance level. And this prediction is updated after each subsequent testlet administration. This report shows a prediction of this student after 8 testlets. This is really well received. In Montana, the early prediction enables teachers and administrators to identify students needing additional support and intervention. And then finally, after a student has completed all of the testlets, we provide a final, reliable, comparable, summative score without the need of a end-of-year summative assessment. Little feedback that we're getting, we're conducting significant surveys of teachers, students, and district administrators this year. The feedback we have from students is overwhelmingly positive, support from multiple shorter tests throughout the year. They experience much less stress, and they believe they have an opportunity to learn better with this short assessments of content they've recently had an opportunity to learn. Finally, also invite you to join us at NCSA. We're going to have leadership from multiple states, including Montana, talking about their journey as they transition to 3-year assessments or other innovative models, and look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Khalid. We're going to have now about 5 minutes for the presenters to ask each other questions and have discussion. While they're doing that, we have a few questions in the question and answer window. So while they're talking, that would give you time to add more, and we'll see which ones we can get to after they've finished their interactive discussions.
If I may, I have a question
Go
for
ahead.
Lynn. Lynn, I'm curious whether Indiana had considered an IATA pathway, Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority within ESSA, as a pathway to transition to this new model. And if not, why not? And how are you kind of meeting ESSA requirements as you transition to this new assessment design without the need of a transition pathway?
Yeah, so with our model, the scale score is still coming from the summative. So it's not a combination of each of the interims that is rolling up. It's only the domain scores, the reporting categories, which are aggregating the data. So that helped to support the need not to have an IADA.
Mhm. Mhm. Great.
I wonder
I have a
if
question for
Lynn,
Arthur.
Oh,
Lynn,
go ahead,
please.
Lynn. You go.
Okay, so Arthur, I'm curious because, you know, while the assessment started the work for us, it's really turned into more of a focus on standards and instruction. And I'm just curious if that's what you're finding in Montana also, or if it's still a heavy focus on the assessment itself.
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking it. Our experience working with the Office of Public Instruction in Montana is that as you transition to a curriculum-aligned 3-year assessment, you inevitably raise questions of curriculum pacing and instructional support for use of the 3-year data. And it was great to see all of the frameworks and support that Indiana is providing. Montana is also working to begin to provide that kind of, I would say, framework support for how do you use this data in the context of your curriculum planning and then in your professional learning around use of data to inform instruction. And I would say, candidly, the 3-year design has revealed a need for districts to become more intentional about alignment between curriculum, instruction, and professional learning around use of data to inform instruction.
And
It's not all
could
our
I add-
job,
Sure.
but it's needs to be part of a system of learning that includes curriculum instruction, assessment, and use of data and professional learning.
Great.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you.
Sorry to jump in there. And I particularly took note that Indiana had this column on the far right about above proficiency and what instruction can continue to happen there. So it's not just about getting students to proficient, it's about moving beyond as well. Khalid, you had a question?
I have so many. Maybe I'll just start with, can we talk a little bit about families and parents in particular? Can each of you maybe say a few words about communication to families, how you are helping them understand this new type of information that they're going to be receiving from the state if they had not expected to see that in the past throughout the year? What feedback have you been hearing from parents as they're getting this information?
Yeah. So in Indiana, we started with a family flyer. So again, with schools piloting, we wanted some information to go home to parents so that they could understand what was taking place. We had family focus groups. So throughout the year, we brought forth, for example, the individual student report that I shared, just getting their feedback. We have the CGSA grant, which is going to directly connect specific resources with the standard spotlights in that one or two of the standards, for each checkpoint for both math and then ELA. They'll be able to take a deeper dive and see how they can connect. We also have a pretty expansive learning lab, which is a hub of resources for educators and families in Indiana. And so with the family portal that we're using, which is one of Cambium's tools, we're also directly connecting them to resources that are already out there as well.
We've been in pilot design and refinement also for 3 years, and so throughout have also been engaging a variety of stakeholders, including families. Part of that has included feedback focus groups on the individual student reports. One commitment that Montana made was to make the individual student reports available to families at the same time they were published for teachers. And so really shortening that window for when families can get access to see their students' performance on each testlet. So those go out through our family portal and are made available. And we have anecdotal reports of parents coming to parent-teacher conferences with those reports in hand and talking to the teacher about what does this mean? What can I do to support my student? So it's exciting to have this opportunity to engage families throughout the year more explicitly in their students' learning process.
That's
Thank
great.
you all. Excellent question. And I think that touched upon what strikes me about how all of these efforts and what you outlined, Khalid, are sort of changing the value proposition of the system of testing that's being used and connecting it more with for the teachers, for the parents, for the administrators, and the whole school community. I think that's been incredibly valuable and will be going forward. On that, a question, how does time on test, how does testing time compare in these systems with the testing time that states are currently setting aside for summative assessment? Do you have any information about that?
I do.
Arthur,
Yeah.
please.
So we committed to operating within the same amount of allotted testing time for the summative, broken up throughout the year or less. And so this is comparable to the testing time used for a summative. What's at least implied in my mind to that question, there are opportunities to further reduce overall testing time if districts begin to feel that this through-year data that they're receiving can replace the need for other interim assessments and eliminate those. That could be significant reduction in overall testing time, but committed to remaining within the allotted testing time for the summative.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Lynn?
For Indiana, each checkpoint is 25 to 40 minutes for each math and ELA checkpoint that's administered. We were able, so total testing time is more. However, we were able to reduce the summative, the end of year testing, because we are aggregating some of that data for the reporting categories throughout the year. But similar to what Arthur shared, it's those other assessments that we're doing away with, or trying to really provide a lot of assessment literacy, in that a diagnostic is not needed for every child 3 times a year. So our checkpoints are designed to be a check-in, and then see where a student might need to go deeper in a specific area, and then target those areas possibly with additional diagnostics.
Great, thank you. If the 3 presenters could open your Q&A windows, if you haven't done so already on Zoom, and looks like the first question is for you, Lynn. Are you able to see it?
I do not see any question. Oh wait, Q&A, sorry. No. So my question was, since you aren't trying to incorporate the checkpoints into the summative, were there challenges in shortening the summative and still get enough data? So we worked extensively. We had a number of thought partners, from Cambium, from our TAC, to Smarter Balance, to Education First, to Center for Assessment. And we do have enough to meet the blueprint and meet psychometrically to get enough data.
Thank you. I'm going to skip down to one that's for each of you, and I'll read it aloud. That with a 3-year model, how do we ensure that the student learning is actually a change to learn long-term memory, I think, rather than short-term comprehension? Are connections made to allow for the testing of concepts and knowledge that build on earlier ones? Arthur, can you take that first?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jesse, and I think it's a question in the the research field that is very relevant to moving toward a model, especially like one used in Montana, where you're trying to assess more closely to when content is taught. And so I would say, at a highest level, it's still an open question of how kind of persistence of knowledge over time is validly and reliably measured in a system like this. So I just want to be upfront about that. There are, I'd say, 2 things. One, math and ELA are different, and I focus more on the math assessment design than the ELA. But in ELA, it's the same set of kind of core competencies to reading comprehension that are assessed multiple times throughout the year. So we see growth and increasing sophistication in those reading comprehension competencies throughout the year. Math is where you're testing more granularly, close to the time of instruction. We support spiraled curricula that return and reinforce certain concepts and skills throughout the year. But if a curriculum, like many recent OER curriculum, are not doing that spiraled approach, then we assess when the content is expected to be mastered, and then move on. We do assume, as do the standards generally, as do most curriculum, that certain standards and competencies build on prior ones. And so those are implied and drawn upon in the testlets that would be according to the sequence of a research-based curriculum. But I just want to acknowledge it's an interesting and open question in terms about mastery of persistence of knowledge throughout the year.
Thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, so in Indiana, when we built our assessment blueprints, not only was it based on the survey that we received from schools, but it's also built on natural learning progressions. And so we studied a lot about that, as well as what our current data had been showing us as we built the assessment. Also, when we tie it back to our instructional frameworks, those are the PLDs, those are also built on the learning progressions. And then we have the second opportunity. So that second opportunity opens the day after the checkpoint window opens, and each checkpoint second opportunity is open until the end of the year summative. And so that allows time for interventions and progress monitoring. outside of just that assessment window for each individual checkpoint. So really a lot of time for learning and then checking back in to see if the student has now mastered those concepts.
Thank you. Khalid, I have one for you, and you've got about 2 minutes to do this. So look into your crystal ball. How do you think changes at the federal level are going to come down and impact these approaches and alternate approaches?
I think I would say the signals in my crystal ball say that states are in the driver's seat in a lot of ways. And so there's a big opportunity for states to shape the programs that they believe are going to serve their students, their educators, and their families the best. And so I would say rather than anticipate, what changes are happening federally, I decided to spend more of my energy helping states make good choices for their work moving forward, going back to those guardrails that we talked about, which you see both reflected in Indiana and Montana's approach. I think both states are demonstrating, a commitment to transparency, to disaggregated data, to providing grade level assessment for every student in every school, while meeting those goals within the values and priorities that are important to each of the states. And so I'm more optimistic about the future of assessment when I look at state examples like Indiana and Montana. And so I think regardless of what changes at the federal level, if states continue on the path that they are headed in, which many have invested significant time, effort, and resources to develop their programs, I think that is probably more of a worthwhile endeavor for at least this current moment until things settle at the federal level.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I would also like to thank all the people who participated in our webinar and all the attendees, and particularly the fellow officers of the Education Division, our Vice Chair, Debbie Crimmins, and our Secretary, Walt Drain. And for those of you interested in following up on this, there are opportunities to meet with these folks at the NCSA conference in a couple of weeks. There's also the opportunity to get involved with the Education Division. These are the kinds of issues we explore and help inform the field about. We will be having a division meeting on July 1st. We have your email. You may be finding out about that in that way as well. And a couple conferences coming up for those of you in Europe, more particularly. We'll be at EATP in Dublin in September, and the 2026 Innovations in Testing Conference will be in New Orleans, March 1st through 4th. So sorry we didn't get to all the questions. Once again, thank you to our presenters, and we hope to see you again on an ATP event soon. Bye-bye.